Just where were you at in your life? What were you doing before you volunteered to go overseas?
So I had just finished my first year at the University of Alberta. It was after 3 years at Grant MacEwan University, Grant MacEwan Community College, and it was right during finals. I remember our RSS had sent an email saying, would anybody be interested?" And it was right before finals, and so I was at a place in my life where I was looking to be anywhere except for finals. So I jumped at the opportunity.
So you basically, did you finish your finals?
Yeah, so I finished my finals. The contract ended up starting January 7th, 2000, around January 7th, right after Christmas block leave, 2007. And so it would have been a full year workup, followed by a 6-month deployment. And then the plan was to be back in school for September 2008.
What were you studying?
Biological sciences, minor in science-based psychology. Was my major is biosci, my minor is psychology. Yeah.
So what? Yeah, you wanted to get away from the academic grind for a bit, but why did you want to go to Afghanistan?
Yeah, there was a lot involved in it. Originally, I had never joined the military to go overseas. I joined the military to get experience for school, life experience, medical experience, things like that. So then it sort of morphed. I became a master corporal in 2005. And then we started becoming heavily involved in Afghanistan. 2006 happened. The guys started coming back from that rotation and started talking about it. And I very quickly realized that if I wasn't engaged in an overseas operation as a master corporal, I felt like I wanted the credibility that brought. And so I figured that a tour would bring that, essentially doing my part. There was a lot of guys at that point who hadn't come back home. And so this was my opportunity to serve, to sort of get the experience, on the ground experience, and to do what soldiers do, which is deploy.
What did your family and friends say when you told them, hey, guess what, I'm going to Afghanistan?
Yeah. So my mom denied it, which was funny for a lady who was very supportive of my getting in the military. She was the one who actually got me into the military, and so she had said that I wasn't going. So finals being what they were, she's already seen me go through several rounds of finals. And so when I told her I was going to Afghanistan, she was just like, "No, you're going to write your finals. You'll be back in school by January." And I had informed her that I wasn't. And so she didn't take it great, but she was supportive, yeah.
And
so the rest of them, same thing. So Dad, very much the same thing. He's like, you don't have to do this. And that was sort of the impression that I got from everybody. You don't have to do this. You're a reservist. So everybody sort of said, like, why are you going? It was a bit of a mixed bag. Friends were supportive. Family was supportive as well. I think it was just that initial shock of like, no, you're not going. You don't have to go. Just stay in school. Yeah.
So what was your workup? A fairly extensive amount of workup training. Where did you do it, and what did you do?
There was a lot of workup. And so the initial course that we went on, I deployed as a Bison ambulance driver, and so that was the position that I had gone into, thinking all I have to do is get my name on paper, and then I'll morph that into something else in a very Porlier fashion. And so the first course that we had to do was a Bison ambulance driver, and so I completed that training at one service battalion. Myself and all the other reserve drivers who were going, all Med-As or reservists who had gone into that position. So this was a new thing that they were trying at the time, health services. Before, it was being supported by drivers, MSE ops typically, or armored personnel. And so we were told that this was sort of a new thing. This would increase the amount of medics or medical personnel that were on the ground. So Bison ambulance driver is where we started. Soon after that, we did our comms course, and then I was on a crew commander course. And then as a master corporal, I started teaching on the courses. So I thought for sure this was my way to sort of work my way back in the ambulance. So I started as a driver, ended up on the Armored Vehicle Administrative Movements, at the time the crew commander's course. And then from there it was time in the field, time on leave, more time in the field. We did both Shiloh and Wainwright for extended periods of time. And then it was just a lot of different courses that we were taking. So the driver course, the comms course, the crew commander course, TCCC, both taking and assisting on that. Yeah.
did you deploy with the 2nd Battalion, or who were you part of?
We were sort of a mishmash. So it was myself and my crew. I guess my crew commander and us. We deployed, and we were a group that was composed of sort of augmentees. So she was an augmentee from Petawawa. She was at Field Hospital at the time, our crew commander. The trunk monkey, the guy in the back, was a reservist in my unit, Master Corporal O'Mara. And so we deployed as an augmenting crew. We were one of the last crews on ground, and so we didn't really have a position. We morphed that into our own position. We ended up supporting most of the other crews when they went on leave. So we ended up doing stints at the PRT. We ended up doing stints with the main battle group 2 VP, as well as just sort of doing CLPs, working on different operations and such as an additional ambulance.
So when you look back with the benefit of hindsight, how adequate do you think your workup training was to prepare you?
It was good. It was a good blend between medical and military. I think that it was excellent to have the guys from 2006 who were training us, who were giving us advice and tactics and training and procedures and really telling us what it was that we would be expecting. Even on the ground, though, things were changing, and sometimes they were changing on a daily, weekly basis, where we were having additional armor put onto our uniforms, additional patches on our uniforms. Platforms changed while we were in theater, so airframe changed, vehicles changed. It was about adapting, but I think that our workup training did a great job at teaching us to adapt and roll with the punches, and I think that that's one thing that Canadians do really well at seas and at home, and overseas, where we're able to adapt.
What about medical procedures down at even at the soldier level? Did you see those change as you went through your workup training and then deployed?
We did, and we still are. So that's one thing that's extremely reactive as far as what's happening. I mean, when we look at tourniquets, we went into Afghanistan, going back to the tourniquet days of Vietnam, where after civilian medicine had really criminalized almost tourniquets and said that there was no place and a lot of other things. And Afghanistan and Iraq started bringing those back into the foreground, saying, actually, that's the only way that you can prevent somebody from dying sometimes, is to put a tourniquet on, and put tourniquets on very early, and be, for lack of a better word, aggressive with some of the treatments that we do. You have to think about both regular force and reserve force medics. When we are out there, it's extended evacuation times, we have limited personnel, we have limited platforms, limited resources. So when you're dealing in those kinds of situations, sometimes you have to improvise and you have to try to stay up to date with what works. So sometimes we were even just sort of passing on things between each other. For example, chest seals that we had in theater, they weren't working well. They weren't adhesive enough. And so between medics, we would even come up with different tricks to pass on to each other. So using things like Dermabond in conventional manner, and binding the pelvises using pant legs that were available. So it was a lot of improvisation, and at times it was a lot of stuff that was rolling quite quickly at the medical level. We were also receiving drugs in theater that we weren't briefed on, so different medications that we were able to give or sometimes not able to give, things that wouldn't happen civilian side, things that we would never do in a hospital, we were doing in Afghanistan, the hospital was doing in Afghanistan, and saving lives doing it. So fresh blood being given in hospitals, and different surgical procedures that normally wouldn't be carried out in Canada were carried out in Afghanistan, and it saved a lot of lives because of it.
What about the whole, I'm old enough to remember like the Falklands War, and the whole push after that was to show everybody how to give an IV to somebody. But that, I think that was kind of not discounted, but went out of favor. Is that correct?
Yeah, so IVs and the Falklands, I think, is where they were really pushing. If you couldn't get a line, just put the line in Buddy's rectum and fluid hydrate him that way. So there will constantly be, I feel that there will constantly be a search for adequate perfusion, adequate replacement fluids. And so on our on our tour, we were using hypertonic saline solution, which is a solution that typically we don't see in Canada. And the idea being that it would draw interstitial fluid, it would bring fluid from within the cells or around the cells, it would bring that back into the circulating fluid. And so we were having to use that fluid on our tour. The priority isn't IVs, and before that shift, before our tour, the shift was that the priority wasn't IVs. If we needed to give medication, or if we needed to bolus somebody, if we needed to get blood pressure up, then yes, we would give IVs, but it's not the first thing that we would concentrate on. And even civilian medicine now, civilian medicine gaining a lot from Afghanistan and Iraq. Civilian medicine is not pushing for IV access early. If anything, it's sort of done in the back of the ambulance if you get it done. It's still within the scope of primary care paramedics. It's still something that's done in the field, but there isn't this immediacy involved in it.
What about, I'm just curious about the extent of your medical preparation in terms of your training for the kinds of traumatic injuries you could see or did see overseas. How adequate was that preparation?
It was good. I mean, as far as war fighting, there's a fairly finite type of wound that you would end up seeing. In medicine, it's fairly infinite. You can end up with a whole bunch of different medical conditions, and polio is endemic in Afghanistan, and that's something that we don't see in Canada. Pertussis and these chronic conditions, these childhood conditions that we've eliminated or tried to eliminate in Canada because of vaccination. So on that side of things, on the medical side of things, I probably could have been more prepared. I mean, I went from taking parasitology courses in university to going into places where we were actually seeing these parasites. And so I had a bit of knowledge on it. But the actual training that we had received didn't touch on things like parasitology and, childhood diseases and diseases that we might see in theater outside of that normal spectrum. So that stuff, absolutely, I felt like I could have used additional training on. You're always going to note that there are chinks in armor, no matter how great that armor gets. And so the medical side of things, I feel like I could have had more additional support in, because we weren't always around physician's assistants or the excellent physicians and nurses that we have that would have some of that knowledge. With that being said, the trauma was really where we focused, and that's the stuff that in the immediacy of the moment, that's what kills soldiers. And so with that stuff, needle decompression came to the foreground, hemostatic agents came to the foreground. And I mean, and when we look at the agents that we're using, popularized by movies like Shooter with Mark Wahlberg, the quick clot that he pours into his chest wound, it's unrealistic, but it was stuff that was brought forward because of conflicts and because the masses were being trained on these products. So quick clot we were using, the granulated product we were using in theater. We were needle decompressing in theater. We were using Crike's surgical airways, which unless absolutely dire had all but been discounted in civilian practice in pre-hospital care. Hypertonic saline solutions, tourniquets were being applied, not irresponsibly, but dare I say liberally. So the medicine that we were learning and the medicine that we were employing in Afghanistan saved lives, got people to the Role 3 where there was amazing clinicians who were getting them home and then getting them onto the Role 4 in Germany and then onto rehabilitation in Canada.
What did you think of the standard of medical training of the average soldier in the battle group, whether they were TCCC or not?
Yeah, TCCC saved a lot of lives as well. So even additional hands for us, like when you train a medic to the highest level, now commissioning at the physician assistance level, you're increasing the amount of hands that are available and skilled hands that are available for the physician to use. And that really did it for us as well. We had guys who had 2 weeks of fairly intensive training. I mean, I came back from Afghanistan and I went into the TCCC cell working as a coordinator and an instructor in there. And the training that we put these guys through, the stuff that we were able to deliver to them in 2 weeks, the anatomy, physiology, the bleeding control, the airway control, the breathing assistance, the stuff that we were able to give them saved lives without a doubt. And so the skilled hands that medics were able to use, when we had a multiple casualty where there was 9 guys in a lav, and that lav had been blown up, it wasn't just us standing there anymore. It wasn't just that basic level of first aid that each soldier had. It was the combat first aid as a minimum, so everybody knew how to use quick clot. Everybody knew how to put on a tourniquet, how to use the dressings, the Israelis that we had in theater. They were able to use those products. So it wasn't us alone having to use those products. The TCCCs were able to decompress. They were able to put in basic airways. They were able to handle themselves in tried situations because of the pre-deployment training that they had been through, the scenario training. The whole second week at TCCC used to be just scenarios over and over and over, repetitive assessed scenarios. So these guys got a lot of hands-on before they came into theater. And so without a doubt, like without the TCCCs, there would be the death count would be a lot higher in Afghanistan for sure.
Once you'd finished your workup training in Canada at that time, what were you expecting it would be like? Do you remember what your sort of expectations were before you headed to Afghanistan?
Yeah, so it was right after Christmas. We were all ramping up, and I had taken a job at Montana's cookhouse in St. Albert just to increase revenue for when I went back to school. And so there was a lot of hubbub about going overseas and being deployed, and there was a lot of talk amongst the family. Christmas was a little bit somber, knowing that I was going to be leaving right away. There was a lot of those special gifts like St. Christopher's and things like that the family gave. And there was just a lot of time to sort of be with family. I do appreciate that. My crew commander also came out, and the week before she actually stayed with my family. So she lived I was living in university, so I lived at home at the time. And so she had a room at my parents' house, which created some bonding there. And sort of it got everybody to be able to know each other. We were the last ambulance crew out of there. We were one of the last chalks out. And so there was a lot of anticipation with seeing everybody being deployed and seeing everybody say goodbye to their family and sort of going and seeing all the other ambulance drivers who we'd gotten really close with over the last year, seeing them off and seeing them with their family and trying to be there every time somebody was leaving in case their family wasn't able to make it. So it was a lot of goodbyes. I don't like goodbyes. So it was a lot of goodbyes at that time and a lot of families saying goodbyes, a lot of early mornings, late nights types of things.
But what were you expecting the situation was going to be like that you were walking into?
Yeah. So as far as going into Afghanistan, there's a part of you that there's 2 parts of you. One sort of is like, I'll see you in 6 months or whatever it works out to be. And then the other part is sort of saying, I might not see you again. And so there is that anticipation. What we thought Afghanistan was, until you're actually in war, until you're actually in a combat zone or a peacekeeping zone or whatever that is, you're unsure of what it is. You see pictures, you see 30-second clips on the news, you hear stories, and you've been trained by people who have been there who tell you just small snippets about what it is. So I mean, as soon as I got off the plane, I expected to just be shot at constantly for 6 months and stuff blowing up everywhere and no safety or security, rockets flying in at every hour of the day at any minute's notice and with no notice at all. And so that's truthfully what I thought I was going into. I thought I was going into pure hell, havoc, mayhem everywhere. And that truthfully didn't go away until after I left the wire for the first time. Until we were actually rolling out, I was still like, okay, there will be an IED right here. Even I remember just leaving CAF, the Kandahar airfield, and thinking at any minute my vehicle could blow up. And so over 6 months, you start to develop an appreciation that that's indeed not what's going to happen. You do get shot at. There are explosions. There was a lot of explosions. There was a lot of bullets, but they're not always coming at you. And it's not the consistency that I thought that it would be. So very much I fell into the Hollywood theme before I left. I fell into the idea that it was going to be danger 24/7. The truth was there was Haagen-Dazs and there was television and there was downtime. There was a water tank that, for lack of a better word, we used to swim in, and we had downtime. We had a fair bit of downtime.
What did you want it to be? What did you hope to get out of this tour in terms of your own personal experience?
The only thing, and my AM partner would probably throw back a good insult right after this, the only thing that I wanted to get out of this tour was medical experience, and specifically I wanted to put in a chest tube. Those were like the two things. And so I'll send him a copy of this just so that he knows that it's on camera. But the chest tube was the big thing for me. It was an advanced skill. It was something that we had trained on more just for fun. But I expected to be able to do the advanced skills, the needle decompression, the crikes, starting lines. There's a novelty about being in war. There's like this romance that you fall in love with about being under fire and being shot at and being in threat. And so there's a part of me that still misses that still misses the possibility of threat, why so many soldiers go and seek things like skydiving and high-risk behaviors after, because there is that risk of threat. And so I also wanted that. I think that not often, but from time to time, I do miss the action that Afghanistan brought in short bursts, for lack of a better word.
What are your, when you do finally hit the ground at CAF, what are your first impressions in that first 24 hours?
It's hot and it smells like shit. That was sort of the immediacy of it. I'm a redhead, and I'm a redhead who runs from air-conditioned shadow to air-conditioned shadow. So it was really hot for me. I spent 7 months just sweating the entire time. I had like this blistered sunburn on my nose for almost the entire time that I was in Afghanistan. So it was extremely hot. I remember getting off the Hercules and just thinking about how hot it was. We were in bats for the first few days, the big-ass tents, large white tents that had just row and row of bunk beds. And so there was no escape from the smell either of the poo pond in CAF. Once that was done, and so there was sort of a two-stage thing. One was getting into theater, actually getting into CAF, where we thought that we were going to be rocketed 24/7 from some of the stories, to actually leaving the wire and getting to a more permanent home that we thought that we were going to be at one of the FOBs. And so there was that second Band-Aid that had to be ripped off, and that was leaving the wire. So both of those were sort of stages. Both of those, the initial impression of being in CAF was the heat, and it was the smell. It's not a great place to smell, and it is hot. And then after that, leaving the wire was just, honestly, I was blown away by how beautiful the country was. In a weird way, you always see everything blowing up and people trying to kill each other. And over the time that we were there, we showed up in winter and we left in fall. And so we really saw the country change. We saw the valley from Masamgar. We saw it change from, this desolate brown place to just like absolutely amazing green everywhere with water running through it. We actually saw why there were bridges there, where initially there was really no need. We saw fields of crops, different stuff. So we saw just fields of crops for days, grape drying huts, grapes off the vines. It's a beautiful country. And so I was floored often. It's one of those countries where the hope is one day I could go back. The hope is one day it would have a tourism industry or something of that nature that I'd be able to see.
Tell me about ripping off that Band-Aid, that first drive outside the wire from CAF to the PRT.
So it was the first drive to the PRT, we got lost. And so that was a bit nerve-wracking in and of itself. The group that was escorting us, medics, we get escorted everywhere, and they do a great job protecting us. But the group that was escorting us was trying to take a different way, so it wasn't the same way that you're taking every single time, and they just got lost on it. So what normally would be, an hour drive turned out to be like a 3-hour drive where, there was a lot of backing up, and it was the first time that I was managing this Bison Armored Ambulance outside the wire, outside of Canada. And so the whole time I was extremely nervous. My whole tour, I was nervous about this vehicle breaking down. And so I just remember driving over things that you're always looking, but driving over things that I didn't know if I should be driving over, wondering if I could clear obstacles that I was able to clear, but just being extremely cautious that first time, watching everybody's the enemy, everybody's out to get you. And that's what you're taught in your training, and you're not trying to make friends, and you're trying to be that hard target. You're trying to be the one that they don't pick. So, and when you're the only one out of 4 vehicles that doesn't have a cannon on your vehicle, you start to look pretty appealing, I guess.
But you made it to the PRT. You mentioned the firefighting reservoir, whatever we're going to call it. What were the rest of your, basically, the rest of your accommodations like at that camp?
Yeah, it was really good. I have no complaints about accommodations anywhere. Even when I was sleeping in the Bison for a few days, it was I was with a good crew and I had a good time. For the most part, those accommodations at the PRT were nice. The medics were staying in concrete. I'm not sure exactly what the fabrication was, but some form of concrete building, 2 floors. It was bunk beds, multiple people inside the dwelling. And so we were lucky in our position that we get to keep going to different places. We got to be at Frontenac and Wilson and Massengar and the PRT, and so we got to see a bunch of different accommodations. And in the PRT, it was nice. It was buildings, for the most part, it was buildings. The accommodations were nice. There was the reservoir. It was good food, good people. It was like a little oasis in the middle of the desert.
And where was it in relation to Kandahar City?
It was right in Kandahar City. So the PRT, I'd have to look at a map to refamiliarize myself, but it was right in Kandahar City itself. So the actual PRT for Kandahar was co-located with the city itself. High walls all around it, nice run-ups inside, but it was very much encircled by the city.
How vulnerable did you feel because of your proximity to the city, or did you feel vulnerable?
I think it goes away. So maybe at first I felt a little bit vulnerable when we first arrived. You know, you're in the heart of the city. We had just been lost getting in, so now we're getting in at nighttime as well, where we weren't necessarily planning on getting in at that time of the day. And so there is a lot of unknowns when you get to a new place, which we experienced several times throughout the tour, but there's a lot of things that you're unsure of. And when you're in the middle of the city, when you can hear gunfire, when you can hear celebrations, or when you can hear whatever, it's close. And so you start to think that it is a little too close. At that time as well, we were just getting there after a suicide bombing. There was just the massive jail breakout at that point. So it was something where we were thinking that if there was intent to get into our camp, that there was a possibility, I guess, to get into there. Yeah.
Can you just tell me what would a typical day be for you, if there was such a thing?
I guess it depends on where we were calling home as far as what a typical day would be. There would always be patients to screen. There would always be some kind of a clinical diarrhea or respiratory infection or eye infection or any type of different infection coming back. Somebody to see musculoskeletal injuries. At some camps, the medics were in charge of sanitation, and so we would be responsible for testing the shower water and chlorinating or hyperchlorinating the water to make sure that it was free of any pathogens. In some camps, we worked in the kitchens to help out with the cooks, so we didn't cook anything. Nobody should suffer that, but we were assisting with the cooks, so we would serve in the meal line, and that helped us take care of soldier welfare as well, so to make sure that they knew who the medics were and to interact with people. Sometimes we would be on patrol, so when we would get farmed back to CAF, because we were sort of the send-out crew, when we were in CAF, some days I would just show up at the Roll 3 hospital, sometimes in dental, sometimes in the lab, and I would just sort of be like, hi, I'm here to work with you for the day, and I just end up weaseling my way into places. Some days we'd be out on patrol, so longer exercises. Some days they'd split our crew up, and some of us would go on patrols. We'd go out on CLPs. We'd be farmed out to the Roll 3. We'd work in the Roll 1. So there was no 2 days that were exactly the same. I liked it for that reason. It was a good blend, a good mix, and it really allowed us to see a whole bunch of different aspects of the province, but also of what different medics were experiencing as well.
If you had to just pick one of those things to do, what would it have been? What was your favorite?
So probably some of my favorite time was probably just with my crew on operations. So when we would actually go out on any type of operation, whether it would be with the provincial reconstruction team, whether it would be with the battle group, just going out and actually just being the three of us in the ambulance, existing in the ambulance, living out of the ambulance, doing our day-to-day stuff in the ambulance, treating patients, and all sorts of stuff. I remember we had one guy who came over to us, and everybody always jokes about things living inside the body, and so he came over and he made contact with the medic, the guy in the back first, Ryan O'Mara, and he was like, this is going to sound crazy, but I think that there's something in my ear. And we joked about it for a long time. We sort of bugged him about it, but there was actually like something in his ear stuck, and it was on its back, and it was just... By the time Ryan looked in, it was and it was this what looked to be a ginormous insect, just like clawing and pinching, stuck on its back in his earwax. So it was just regular stuff like that would sort of throw curveballs at us, where you never knew what the day would bring. But the best time that I had was, I think, without a doubt, with my crew, with both Nick and Ryan. Yeah.
You're the crew commander this time?
No, I was the driver, but they're my crew. Okay. They need to understand that, yeah. Yeah, we were all three master corporals. So Nick was a master corporal, Ryan was a master corporal, ex-reserve infantry as well, and then myself, I was a master corporal who took a rescindment in rank for the tour. So we were all sort of master corporals trying to be in charge at times.
Oh, what was it like within that, on that tour as a reservist, in terms of the reg-reserve mix? Did you have any issues that way? Or?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's always going to be that mix. We showed up, and I won't say his name, but one of the guys who turns out to be a great guy, good friend, he was sort of like the derogatory terms that were coming out of his mouth, because they hadn't interacted with reservists before. We hadn't been deployed in such a large capacity. We had never been part of the battle group in the way that we were for this group anyway. They had never experienced us. And so when we showed up, even the commanders were sort of saying, you don't know if you're getting a surgeon or, a high school kid, and sometimes you can't trust a reservist to put a Band-Aid on your big toe. And this was sort of the stuff that we were hearing. And it was sort of like you were the new guy. So no matter which crew you're in, if you're the new guy, you're going to have to work your way up and earn respect. We showed up initially, the drivers, and we had our rank, and nobody really knew that we were reservists. We didn't really talk to anybody as though we were reservists. And so when I was a master corporal for the first 3 months of tour before the leaves fell, I was treated very much as a master corporal. And then it started to sort of come out that I was a reservist, and then it was sort of earning your pay. Yeah. We probably don't do ourselves too many favors, because we're coming from, like many of us were coming from university, and so we had that sort of educated air about us and things. But definitely there was some integration issues that I think we worked out seamlessly. By the end of the tour, reservists were serving right next to Reg Force. Reservists were taking the same casualties the Reg Force were taking, doing the same jobs, the same skills. I think that we very much earned our right to be there. Yeah.
Is there a day, an event, an incident that is memorable to this day for you, that sort of stands out in your 6-month deployment?
There's probably a few. Some of them are a little bit limited medically, what I could talk about, but the one that sort of sticks out is we were at FOB Massamgar, and we were working out that day. So we weren't out on exercise, or we weren't out on operation. We weren't doing anything heavy that day. It was just going to be one of those down days. And then an Afghan National Patrol, an Afghan National Police Patrol had been hit, and they brought all the casualties, were all brought into Massamgar. So what seemed like a very, fun-filled day of working out in the heat and running up hills and things like that, became quite a serious incident. And so we ended up, it was near the end of our tour. We were just sort of marking time until we could go home. And all of a sudden we got a good 6 or 7 casualties dropped on us that were all riding in the back of a pickup when they were hit by an ambush. And so we ended up with a lot of injuries that were challenging to deal with as medics. And that was the day that I ended up doing the chest tube. So we had a new physician's assistant there, and we were fairly overwhelmed with casualties. We had T-CCCs there. We had a 3-bed sort of treatment area at the time that we were working with some multiple casualty overflow. We were trying to keep guys outside, and we had one guy that needed this procedure done, and the PA didn't have the capacity at the time, and so I got to jump in there. And so that was probably, for me, a day that stands out as being one of those days to remember. There's other days for sure that I remember quite vividly, but that would probably be one of the highlights of the tour, because that's why I had wanted to go, was to do the medical stuff. Yeah.
So just explain to someone who's not, but perhaps even in the military, this chest tube procedure, when would you use that and why?
So if there's air or blood inside the chest, it has to be evacuated. And so if there's air, we can needle decompress. So we can put a needle in the front of the chest. The chest tube is used more definitively. So it's a more invasive procedure. So we make an incision in the side of the chest, and we actually put a tube into the side of the chest, thread it up about a foot up into the chest cavity, and then suture it in place, so stitch it in place, put a seal over top, and then we hook it up to a vacuum, for lack of a better word. And then that allows for the lung to reinflate and gets the blood out of there, gets the air out of there, and everything else. And so the big reason why that's a salient point, it's sort of a rubbing point between myself and Ryan, my AM partner, is that we were both sort of competing for that time that we got to do it. When we first left the wire, the very first time we left the wire, it was for Shirzai, which was an Afghan National Army training base. And we went to train the medical staff there and do a bunch of training and teaching and coaching. And that day, it was 4th day on ground, and it was chest tubes is what they were learning. And so we sort of had this running sort of joke throughout the tour that who was going to be the first one to be able to do it. And it was like right at closeout of our tour. I think a few days later, we were back in CAF. So this was sort of the opportunity to do it. So that's why it's a funny point, but it's also it was a challenging thing as well. It's outside of our scope. So to be able to do something like that. And that was, I mean, a lot of things are outside of the general scope of medics overseas as far as what we're doing and what we're trained to do. So, yeah.
I forget the phrase you used. You said there's other medical, when you're going through your sort of mental inventory of talking about what you could talk about, what are the other medical procedures that stand out?
Crikes, so like cutting somebody's, lack of a better word?
No, but I mean an actual anecdote about care that you administered.
So doing procedures in Afghanistan. So I was the recipient of the Major General Bar Award that year, so 2007. It's an award that's given to one medical person every year. And I was given it for the branch that year. And I wandered over to the Roll 3 one time, and when we were just in the Kandahar airfield, I wandered over to the Roll 3, which is the hospital, and I was like, hi, I'm here to work for the day, and then worked my way into surgery. One of the nurses recognized me, and she introduced me to one of the surgeons who knew about the Major General Bar Award. And she said, Corporal Porlier received the Major General Bar Award. He was, I guess, impressed by this. And so he let me scrub in for the next surgery. He let me actually work with the next surgery to do some things that were also challenging. And so that was exciting. I mean, we were involved in a few surgeries, mostly at the head, working with the anesthesiologist, working on some of our skills there. But definitely working at the Roll 3 was something that was a whole new world for us. Sometimes we didn't get to see that. Some medics didn't get to see that at the Roll 3. So it was a nice opportunity to be able to be there and to be able to work on a trauma team and be able to work in the surgical suites and be able to work on a surgical team. So that stuff definitely challenged. The clinical medicine as well. I remember I screened one little boy who had polio. We suspected to be polio anyway. The diagnostics weren't all there, but he had sort of some of the signs of polio. And so being exposed to things like that as well were something that we may not I otherwise might not be able to do in Canada. So some of the medical things that we were able to do, that we were able to see, were exciting from a medical standpoint.
Was there a time when you had to give aid in contact or under fire?
There was times when we would pull them back into the ambulance and provide care in there, yes. But there was no, I was never under direct fire when I was providing care to anybody, no.
Ultimately, how satisfying was this tour for you?
Yeah, it was, people always ask me, civilians, as soon as I got off the plane, I went to my sister's, they were having a party, and so I went into the party, and no sooner did I cross the door than somebody asked me what the worst thing I saw was and how was it, and they look at you with sad eyes and they expect you to crumble in front of them and sort of pour your heart and soul out. And so I always say that it was a good experience, that I learned a lot. It might not have been that for everybody. There was a lot of tough days. I've had a lot of the worst days of my life were in Afghanistan, but some of the best days of my life were in Afghanistan. And so being exposed to that was by far a positive experience, I think. And even the bad days, to take away from it, the friends that I was able to make, the relationships that I was able to build, the skills that I was able to learn and practice, really were beneficial to me. So even here in Canada, you can end up losing friends. I wouldn't want that to define how my tour was the friends or the people that we lost or who we put on a helicopter.
Can you tell me about a bad day?
There's so few to pick from. So I guess one of the worst days for me in theater would have been May 6th. So that was the day that Mike Starker was killed. I was nowhere around. I was actually up at FOB Frontenac at the time. We were enjoying a bit of a vacation, to be honest. It was a FOB that was far taken away from everything. We'd only been rocketed a couple of times, and it was right at the end of our time there. There was a large gym, good food, great time. I remember we were on comm shutdown, so anytime anybody was injured, involved in a significant incident, comms would be turned off in Afghanistan. And so when you're trying to be on the computer or make a phone call or anything like that, you notice it. And so we noticed that comms had been shut down that day. And then we were approached by Warrant Officer Al Zaban, came to us and asked us to speak to us. We were just sitting outside in front of some blast walls where we were sleeping. We were essentially sleeping in like a nice little reefer at the time. And he came over to us and he informed us that Mike had been killed that day. He said that a medic had been killed, and then that it was Mike Starker. Mike was a member of my unit. He was a friend. He'd somebody who I'd considered to be an amazing soldier. Looked up to Mike in a great way. He was everything that a medic should be. He was physically fit, he was extremely knowledgeable, and he kept on reaching for excellence in his field. And so I looked up to Mike. It was a hard hit that day when we were told. And then it was just about sort of getting it out to everybody else and trying to process it that day, and being so far away from it as well. Being far away from everybody, it was us and the AM crew and a couple of dismounts at that point. So it hurt to miss the ramp ceremony. It hurt to not make it back for the funeral, things like that. So that was a bad day, May 6th, yeah.
Can you told me about the chest tube was a good day. Is there another, like an offsetting good day you can tell me about? Maybe a lighthearted day? Or just something, what would you do when you weren't working so hard? How did you sort of unwind?
Yeah, there was a lot of, when we weren't working, there was a lot of working out. So the crew, we would sort of work out with whatever we had. At Massamgar, we'd run up the mountain, for lack of a better word, the little mount there. In Frontenac, we'd be working out at the gym. Wilson, we'd try to hit the gym, run around the FOBs. In CAF, we'd work out at the gym. So there was times where we would just try to work out. That was our decompression, our down times. But a lot of the times that we spent together were probably the good times. So just hanging out together, watching movies together on our small portable DVD player that we'd plug into the ambulance to charge or take out with us. So for me, those were the good days that we were together. There's no one amazing day that stands out or sticks out. Probably just when we were around the fire reservoir, when we got to actually do that, or when we were able to be out, just the three of us, was probably some of the best times.
What did you do for your HLTA?
We went to Croatia and Greece. So I had my sister and my best friend came over, and I met them in Zagreb, and then we went over to the coastline and went down the coastline, flew out from Croatia and flew into Athens, toured around the islands for a bit, and then came back. And so it was myself, my sister, and my best friend, but also Ryan and his wife decided to come over at that time as well. So they were in Croatia and Greece with us for a lot of it. They ventured off and did their own thing. Sometimes we'd randomly meet them on a bus by happenstance, but we did end up going and doing those two countries. I wanted to see a country that Canadians had been involved in, and so my original plan was to fly into Zagreb, rent like an RV, and drive through Bosnia into Greece, and sort of the team kiboshed that idea, as well as the fuel prices at the time and the accessibility of RVs, which I thought would be readily available in Europe, which turned out not to be. So we decided to take that route. It was good because we did get to see some of the Canadian war history and peacekeeping history in Croatia. And then going to Greece was like a nice final decompression in that time.
Was it tough going from that sort of idyllic cruising the Greek islands back to Afghanistan?
Yeah, we went back to the PRT, so it wasn't horrible. So it was really tough. It was tough to say goodbye again. It was something that I wouldn't want to do, to say goodbye and sort of know that everybody was going back. And I think that there was a fair amount of guilt with the sister and the best friend, because they were going back to Canada, and then I was going back into theater. So I think that there was another time where, you're like, I'll see you in 3 months. But that party is also saying I might not see you again, going back into theater. So there was also Colin Wilmot was killed while we were on HLTA. So there was going back to that as well. We hadn't had time to process that. I mean, I found out just scrolling through MSN, Colin's picture had shown up on July 6th when we were in transition from Croatia to Greece. So there was going back into theater and trying to figure out what happened and things like that. And again, missing a ramp ceremony for a friend, and missing a funeral for a friend. So closure.
The soldier at the massacre role I interviewed this morning, who went to Iraq with the Marines, they just do a straight 8-month tour. They don't get to go on HLTA. They don't get a 72-hour or 96-hour R&R. What do you think, in hindsight? Do you think that break, that HLTA, is a good thing in the middle of an experience like this, or do you think it would have been easier, perhaps, just to do the straight 6?
I don't know. I've never done it the other way. So it was a nice vacation. I'm not going to get you wrong. I'm not going to take that away and say that it was horrible, because it was nice to get away. It was nice to see people from back home. It was nice for a recharge. But I'm not sure. I've done 6 months with a lot of different things, so maybe 6 months and then a vacation, or something like that might be another way to go. It was definitely appreciated within there. I'm glad that we were where we were. We ended up on ground February, and then we didn't take our HLTA until I think July or August. We might have come back from HLTA, so it was nice to work that long and then go on HLTA and then come back for just a very short period of time for us. Yeah.
Tell me about leaving the country, and I'm assuming you went to Cyprus for decompression. What was that like? What were your feelings as you're sort of leaving CAF, and then tell me a bit about Cyprus?
Yeah, we were with the new crew for probably a month. So we were with Roto 6 for probably a month. And so we had started to develop some bonds with those guys and some of the different crews and stuff. And so it was a mixed bag. We were leaving behind a lot of stuff. And so to move forward was good. To move on to the next sort of destination was good. To be able to go to Cyprus. I was really lucky with the AM crew that I had because we were together the whole time. Some AM crews had been cannibalized, people inserted in different places. We didn't have that. So from the day that we arrived till the day that we said goodbye in Edmonton, we were all together. And so that was extremely nice. Leaving the country was a mixed bag. You're always thinking back to what had gone on while you were away, what you had experienced, what you guys had all been through. But moving on to Cyprus, wanting to see the girlfriend again, wanting to see the family again, wanting to get back to real life. Even sort of after 18 months of being away from school, maybe thinking that school wasn't the worst thing in the world, was nice to get back to. So it was a mixed bag. Definitely happy to be home, definitely anxious to be leaving.
And just tell me a bit about how did Cyprus work in terms of the official stuff you had to do and the unofficial stuff?
Yeah, it was good. I think that, I don't know anything different, so I don't know what it used to be like, and I don't know what transitions are worth, but I think that there was definitely some value to Cyprus. It was nice to be able to hang out with people who were on tour with us in a non-combat environment, to not have to worry necessarily about everything that we had just left behind. It was nice to have talks with other medics to find out how their tours were, to sort of put some stuff away with the AM crew as a last goodbye. It was nice. Yeah, it was nice to have that vacation. So we would wake up in the morning, we'd attend sessions, and then in the afternoon we were allowed to book tours, and we were allowed to just sit by the pool and suntan if you're into that. And so for us it was a nice time away. There was also, if I'm not mistaken, some form of stipend given at that time, so you were allowed a certain amount of money to attend certain events as well, or they were covered, or I forget entirely how it worked, but Cyprus was a good time, and it was nice at night to relax with people and have that opportunity to reconnect and sort of slowly get back into things before the family and everything was thrust on you.
So tell me about that part, the actual physically coming back to Canada. What happened? How were you greeted?
Screaming mother. I remember we came through at the gym. We had left through the LTF. We came back at the gym, and I was one of the first ones off the bus. I was one of the first ones on the bus. So the arrival was amazing. We were escorted by two CF-18s. On either of our wings. They were super great guys, the pilots. We landed, we had a hero's welcome. Through the city of Edmonton, we had police escorts the whole way. That was pretty sweet. And we didn't have to skirt around the yet to be completed Anthony Henday. We went straight through Edmonton. So it was literally the fastest I would ever come back from the airport, I think. We didn't stop once the whole way. We get to the gym, and truth be told, the first one that I had actually seen when I came through the doors was my now wife. She was amazingly beautiful sitting there, and then I heard my mother sort of yelp/scream and run very aggressively towards me. And so I just remember sort of saying, "Mom, calm down, calm down." And then she had hugged me, and then it was this slew of people. So RSS at the time, the CO for our unit at the time, the RSM, my sister, my girlfriend, my father, my aunt. So there was a lot of people there. I felt very much welcome at that point. And then when we first arrived on ground, friends who had come and been there, friends, the RSM brought her children at the time. So it was nice. It was a nice welcome. Definitely felt happy to be back. And then it was back into the car, and my girlfriend's new car at the time. So she drove me back to Morinville, the town that we live in, or lived in at the time. And then it was to, my brother and sister were having a ball wind-up party. So it was to there to see them and my cousin, and then have a few drinks. So it was nice. It was a nice welcome back.
And what was it like in the subsequent weeks and months as you just had a transition from, very focused, existence in Afghanistan to being a civilian again?
Yeah. I sort of came back to be a bum. So I had come back to start school in September, and I'd missed that because I was the last chalk out of Afghanistan. So I missed fall semester, and so I was resolved to hit winter semester in January. So for that time, I had 2 months paid vacation. So that took me into November, and then it was back to being the MOBUM, so sort of the Class A, picking up whatever I could. So that period of time, it was nice. I went away to Ontario, saw my extended family, went on a 2-week trip down to the United States with my best friend, another best friend. We ended up, climbing and touring around like amazingly exciting places like Utah and Idaho, and ran the Grand Canyon and hung out in Vegas for a day, and it was really nice. And I think because of Afghanistan, I had the money to be able to do things like that. Because I didn't have any other commitments, I was able to do that, and it sort of kept me away from having to explain anything about Afghanistan. Down in the States, we could just be, Chris and Chris. We didn't have to be Chris and Chris that just got back from Afghanistan. We didn't have to answer to anybody or explain anything like I was doing to family in Ontario and friends back at home, who the first question is like, how was it? What'd you see? And what was the experience? So it was nice to just get away. I do remember the RSS at the time sent me, in December once I was back, sent me to the Arctic for an Arctic exercise, which was a bit evil, coming from Afghanistan and then coming from down in the States to then go up to extremely cold weather. That was sort of my first exercise back in Canada. It was just north of Churchill, so it was cold. Yeah, but that part was a good transition. Getting to university was a bit more of a difficult transition, but it was definitely nice to be back and feel appreciated by the family and friends and things. Yeah.
What's the black medal?
It's the Order of St. John.
So is that related to Afghanistan, or is
No.
that a broader sort of service?
It's a broader, so it's one of the 5 order systems of Canada. So there's the Order of Canada, the Order of Police Merit, the Order of Military Merit, the Order of Merit, and the Order of St. John. Okay. Yeah, that's service to the order.
I figured that's what it was, but I just want to see if there was a connection to your tour.
No, not that one. No.
Okay. Almost done. I'm just curious, when you look back on the whole experience, how do you think it changed or affected you as a person and as a soldier?
Yeah. So as a soldier, it gave me the skills that I needed to sort of move on. It tested my skills as well. Now I can say that I'm sort of tested in theater, and I have the experience to be able to pass on to my guys, and the ability to train. I mean, I've taken on a huge role in training, and that's sort of where I've found my niche. And to emphasize the importance of training and things like that. So as a soldier, it's done amazing things for me. I got to experience things in theater. So I got to experience even, programming, or not programming, but entering crypto into radios, which we don't use here, or being around ECM, or, handling weapons in theater, and knowing what you would be like when you got shot at, and explosions around you, and knowing that you do have the confidence and the skills to be able to assist somebody in times of need when there's other things going on. That's what it gave me. So it gave me confidence. It gave me, amongst my peers, credibility. So amongst those who had been to Afghanistan, it gave me the ability to, wear the same medal on my chest, and to have that understanding amongst them, so that when I did go out with other units as medical support, they sort of knew that I was tried and tested in a theater of war. And so soldiering, it did good things for me. Personally, it did good things for me too. It was an opportunity for me to grow. It was an opportunity for me to make new friends, to really develop myself as a future leader, hopefully. And again, to just be tried and tested in a stressful environment. So my work ethic, for example, and my ability to grin and bear it, my ability to suffer through things really has been amplified by this experience. And to know what I can handle as well. mental health is a big component. Mental toughness and mental readiness is a big component. And I think that that's something that's starting to be stressed more and more in the military. Is it's not just physical strength, it's mental toughness. And so my mental toughness has been challenged in Afghanistan, before Afghanistan, since Afghanistan. And that's something in stressful situations that I'm able to see now in my soldiers, and I'm able to see in even the general public. I'm able to put the pen down when I'm working with somebody and say, how are you doing? How are you actually doing? You know, how are things? And be able to relate to them, be able to empathize with them, and to be able to sort of care. So that is something that personally I've taken out of this. I did a lot of talking in Afghanistan. You go from being in university where you're isolated and you work on projects and you work on exams and things, and from school and in work, you know, you work on your projects, to sitting down for a few months where when you're not on operation, when you're not outside the wire, you're just talking, or you're just sitting and engaging with people. So I gained a lot from Afghanistan, personally and professionally.
Is there anything in summation that you want to say about your experience that I haven't asked you about, or you haven't had a chance to say?
No, I think it's good. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks.